Hello, I'm Nels Jensen with PE.com, and welcome to our test score roundtable. We're going to be talking about some recent release of data from the state and federal levels at our primary education system here. Joined by a couple of guests to my immediate left, Kenneth Young, the Riverside County Superintendent of Schools, and Roger Yoho, who's the Director of Assessment and Accountability for the Corona-Norco Unified School District, which is the largest district in the county. And we'll also be joined soon by Dana Straley, who is the PE education reporter. We are going to begin, Roger, with, we're going to turn it to you and sort of go through an explanation, PowerPoint here, of what the data that we're looking at and what it means and how these scores are sort of compiled. So we're gonna turn it over to you, and the screen, you'll see this PowerPoint that we're going through it.
Okay, we can go to slide one. What's being released today to the public is the school district and state's accountability system that is called the Academic Performance Report. And it's one of the ways that parents can look at, and the general public, they can look at how well schools are doing, but it's only one of many ways that we can look at schools. There's test results that mom and dad get back after the exams are given in the spring. By California law, each public school is required to teach the California content standards, and of course we do. And at the end of that academic year, or toward the end of the year, students are tested on one of these four exams. The California Standards Test is the test that most kids take. We've got two exams that, we've got some exams for students with disabilities, one called the California Modified Assessment and the California Alternate Performance Assessment. In addition, at the high school, we actually give the California High School Exit Exam, which is a graduation requirement. And all of those exams, the results of that are all put into two different measures to show the public how well schools are doing.
And the CST is grades 2 through 11, correct?
Yes.
Right.
The California Standards Test, or 2 to 11. Here in the state of California, we actually have two different accountability measures. One's called the Academic Performance Index, API, and it was actually created back in March 5th of 1999. And we were one of the very first states to actually have accountability model. And what the API is, it's basically a growth model where a school is shown where they're at, and they're given a target to go a little bit higher. The next model is called Adequate Yearly Progress, AYP, and that's actually based on federal law, the No Child Left Behind legislation that was authored in 2001. And so one's federal and one is state. Now the AYP, the federal, that has a mark that keeps getting higher and higher and higher for schools to make, to the extent that by that law, by the 2013-14 school year, 100% of our students are supposed to be at or above proficient. So if we can go to the next slide, you'll be able to see, I'm going to just briefly say what the API is. The next one, after that one. Here we go. When mom and dad get their results home, they're in the mail, they're going to find that their students get one of 5 performance levels. They'll get far below basic up to advanced. Now the state of California, this is for API, they'll give schools more credit for helping students that really struggle in school down toward the bottom of the scale. There's more points than going up toward the top. And when you look at that particular scale, you'll notice that it's really hard to keep that 1,000 point in that really high proficient advance. It's really difficult to maintain that, but schools throughout the county, of course, try to the very best of their ability. The next, please. Okay, when for the API, the scale goes from 200 to 1,000, and the state has a target for 800. So all schools are trying to at least get to 800. If they're below that 800, if you go to the next slide, what you'll see is they'll have a growth target. They'll actually say to you, okay, well, you're not at 800, but you're below that, so we're going to ask you to try to go up 5% over this next year, 5% of the difference between the 800 and whatever the school score happens to be. So there's always a target, there's always a way of trying to keep going forward. On the next slide, it will start the AYP. Oh, excuse me, I forgot to do this part. There's actually two APIs that come out every year. One's called the base and the other one's called the growth. When the base API comes out, it's the one that mom and dad can look at statewide rankings and similar school rankings. So last May, when the state released the 2009 base API by category, elementary, intermediate, or high school, parents could look on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being high, 1 being low, and they can see it against all elementary. If your child was in elementary school, they get look at all elementary schools in the entire state for a statewide ranking of 1 to 10. In a similar fashion, they've got a similar schools ranking on the base API, where schools that have similar students' backgrounds can be compared on 1 to 10. The one that came out today is called the growth API. It's kind of like a pre-test, post-test. The base is like where you started, growth is like where you ended up. And so what you're looking at today is there won't be any statewide rankings or similar school rankings, but it's basically telling you, okay, well, how much did you improve? Or how much did you change from one year to the next? Okay, so now that was all state. Now we're going into the federal No Child Left Behind with adequate yearly progress. That's one part of the No Child Left Behind provision. It's an accountability measure. Going next slide, there's actually 4 components to that. One is the target to have at or above proficient in English language arts and mathematics. There's a participation, which just means kids are taking the test. The next is an overall API, and the one after that is a graduation rate for high schools. And the way that AYP is different is the fact that for AYP, for adequate yearly progress, they're only looking at or above proficient. So they're looking at proficient and advanced only. So when you see the results, it'll say the percentage of kids that are at or above proficient. Next slide. And the California Standards Tests, the California Modified Assessment, and the California Alternate Tests are in there for grades 2 to 11. But high school, it's really unique because AYP at high school is only the California High School Exit Exam. It's important for parents to know that if their high school happens to have 9, 10, 11, and 12th grade at that high school, the only kids that are counted when it comes to the AYP are only the 10th graders who are taking the exit exam for the very, very first time. And it's not just a passing rate, it's a much higher, it's called scale scores. It's much higher than, you have to get a lot more right to be considered proficient. Next slide. And as you can see here, it goes really, on the left-hand side, you'll see it's English language arts, continues to go up all the way to 100%. And same thing in math, all the way up to 100% over the next couple of years. That slope is really, really hard and to keep going up. Next slide. Actually shows you, it's got 4 columns of numbers, but basically the middle column for the 2009-10 said what our targets were last year. You can see for 10, 11, and 11, 12 how much the targets continue going up.
Yeah, those are really aggressive.
Really
we call those hockey sticks around here. It just goes up at a very
incredible rate.
level.
Yeah,
right?
it's really, and that's why I always like to tell mom and dad, there's a lot more to school than test scores. And there's an awful lot more that's going on, and how's their child doing in school? That's what's really important. Did they pass the California High School Exit Exam? Are they getting ready for college? Are they getting ready for a career? This is one way to look at a school, but it's only one way. And the way I like to describe that is this. If you go to your medical doctor, you would not think it wise if your medical doctor only took your blood pressure and said how your health was. You need a lot more ways of looking at your physical health to determine its real status. This AYP and API are really important for moms and dads, but it's only one of many ways, just like a doctor needs multiple ways of looking at a school.
Okay, and is that the end of the?
Yes, sir.
Very good. So Ken, now Roger made reference to the parental concerns that you hear about throughout the market, but what really do these barometers mean on a countywide level? You see these numbers frequently, a couple times a year. What's your immediate reaction when these numbers come out?
Well, I think it's twofold. One is we have to look at where California was at prior to 1999 when these measures went into place. The state adopted over a period of time textbooks that were based on content standards. And then we had assessments that came out to measure how students were doing academically within that content. So it was the first time that really we had a way to measure and see how, at least in 4 core subjects, students were doing from school to school, school district to school district across the state. And that gives a way for parents to view, based upon these four primary measures, four subjects rather, how students are doing. And so I think it's good for us to be able to have a way to be able to say to the public, based upon the taxpayer money that's being given to fund the school system, in one very specific area, this is how the results are on it. No Child Left Behind came out in 2001, just shortly after the API came out, and it concentrates on two subjects, as Roger pointed out, English, language arts, and mathematics. So if parents just want to look at that, and that's really the only measurement system that's out there right now, that's a way for them to look at this and say, based upon these things, this is how my school's doing. I think it's important to look at the student populations that are in the schools, because some schools have primarily, they're homogeneous in the enrollment that they have, the student population that they're serving. Their test scores might look like A. You have another school that's another part of the district or in the county that their student enrollment speaks 15 or 20 different languages. They have different students with disabilities. They have students that are just barely speaking English and low socioeconomic. And so you're comparing apples and oranges. They happen to be on the same subjects, but the students are starting out at all different places. So I think it's important to look at the data, and we want to see progress being made in schools. We want to see school students achieving academic improvement every year. And that's overall as a county, that's what we are seeing year after year. In fact, the academic progress results from 1999 to 2010, Riverside County has the second highest increase over that period of time. I think it's 174, 176 points, which is the second highest in the state, among the 16 largest comparable counties that we have.
But how does that progress compare to these very aggressive goals and standards we saw in the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I think if you look at the state's goals, the state is saying that they would like to have every school at 800. We have a large number of our districts that are at over 800, and a number of our schools are at over 900 this year, which is very exciting. So that's an important piece of information. When you look at the federal No Child Left Behind Act, the first few years the growth requirements were more moderate. Now it's, as Roger was talking about, it's kind of like a ski slope or a hockey puck. And if you look at the average academic percent proficiency in English language art across the state that students are doing, it's about anywhere from 5 to 7%. The requirements to meet the No Child Left Behind requirements between now and 2014 are 11%. By far exceeds what the state has ever done. And so what happens is more and more schools are being identified as a program improvement, needing to have interventions. They're not meeting their adequate yearly progress, yet they're making good progress on the state's accountability system. So there's kind of a conflict here that occurs. And really it comes down to which one of these two measures are most important to look at. There's value in both of them, but just because a school is doing well on the API, they might be deemed as failing under the No Child Left Behind Act.
So as a county, from your county lens, how do you deal with that conflict?
Well, let me just add another element to here. As I travel around the county meeting with various stakeholder groups, parents, school site administrators, superintendents, and community leaders, it's interesting how few of them really, the large stakeholder groups are really looking at API or AYP. What they really want to know is, are kids graduating from high school? Are kids prepared to go off to college if they choose to do so? And especially in this economy, are they ready for the workforce? Unfortunately, right now the state doesn't have any way to measure students' preparation for going into the workforce. We do have a couple of measures for college readiness, college going rates, which really need to be looked at kind of as an aggregate. But the public in general is most concerned, I think, about those three areas.
Mm-hmm. And I think we'll get back to that,
okay,
how you measure readiness in a minute. Roger, I wanted to turn to you now with going from a countywide lens to an individual school district. So you have parents like me who are asking those very same questions. I have 2 kids in high school. Mm-hmm. You know, how ready are they for the workforce after going through the school district? How do you deal with those, accountability and measures for readiness?
That's a really good question. And the state is just now struggling with ways to be better at that. One way is school districts and look at the percent of students that actually complete what they call the A through G requirements, which are the courses required for students to be able to go to the University of California or the California State University system. So they're looking at the percentage of students that are ready, they complete all those courses. Another way to look at it is how many students are taking advanced placement courses and what type, if they're taking the AP exam, what type of scores are they getting? And so we look at the percentage of students that get a passing score on the AP. SAT, of course, is required by many colleges and universities, and so we look at SAT scores as well. So we do look at dropout rates because obviously we want our kids to be engaged. We want them to be there and engaged. But we have pretty high standards. We want students to be in school. We want them to be able to meet their own goals that they want out of high school, because that's ultimately what matters. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what really matters is, did the youngster learn what they needed to learn in K-12 so that they could go on to a career or a college situation and then be successful at it.
Sure. Now let's get the data queued up here so we can talk about some of the numbers that have just come out. And as we get that ready, so a question, Roger, now, so these scores come out and some schools doing better than others. How does this measurement impact curriculum or faculty, at an individual school level?
In our school district, the Corona Unified School District, teachers and principals, everybody takes the scores really seriously, and they kind of drill down through the information to see where their strengths are in their instructional program and where they might need to have it short up a little bit. And so they look at it not only as an entire grade level of school, but they're looking at it all the way down to the individual child. Where is that child? For example, in our school system right now, a teacher can go online. It's a secured area, but they can go online. They can see exactly the history of the students they have in the classroom right now, and they can see, okay, well, here are the relative strengths and weaknesses of that specific child. Okay, they've learned these concepts, but they haven't learned these quite so well, so now I need to boost these up. They do that type of thing all the time.
Okay, so we're going to look at the top performing schools in the region, and this is, would this be the California State standards?
This would be the API scores.
The API scores.
Right.
Okay, so a lot of Southwest Riverside County represented there, one in Redlands, the San Bernardino Prep High, and we're going to be joined as well now by Dana Straley, the PE education reporter, who's been working on these test scores for a couple of years, no stranger to these results, and of course a Riverside Elementary School in here as well. Okay, do we have more?
I think those are just the top 10 that we put
So,
on the graphic.
Dana, you've seen these results from, I believe, Friday morning. What struck you in looking over, this sea of data?
The districts in the area we cover, the district aggregate API is up overall. In a number of districts, San Bernardino, Temecula, for instance, what surprised me this year is the number of schools that had fairly substantial drops. But then again, these were also schools, in the case of Alamos Elementary School, that was #1 last year. Now they're #3. They had a drop, but they had a huge growth last year. The interesting thing I heard just a little bit ago from State Superintendent Jack O'Connell is he now wants to start discussions about raising that goal of 800 for the API. He's not sure to where, but he wants to start discussions on that, and I had not heard that before.
Ken?
Well, I think that's a very important point, because the state set that goal arbitrarily years ago as an objective for all schools, because it seemed like a very high target. And once you have schools hitting 800 and they're meeting the state's target, but they're failing under the federal No Child Left Behind Act, you have to look at things. I think the average school score of the schools that are meeting the federal AYP targets is 850. And so the 800 is almost becoming irrelevant. And especially with the influx of federal dollars and the desire by the state to capture those dollars for public education with the cuts that are happening here, there is certainly a focus on trying to meet federal requirements. And so when the federal requirements are such that they've got an 11% growth model going on every year, and the state one is different than that, and schools are meeting the state's growth model but failing the federal one, you have to stop and say, okay, we have a disconnect here. And that's a discussion I think that's been going on behind the scenes for a while, but is now hit the forefront because the evidence is quite obvious on it.
So we'll hit on the factors that go into that, reaching that 850 kind of federal standard in a second. But first, how Dana raised a good point about sort of fluctuations.
Yeah.
You know, these schools have changes in administration and teachers, and there's lots of different components that go into education. How do you explain, or what kind of factors go into the fluctuations?
Well, I think first of all, if you look at the scores that we had up on the screens, almost all those schools are elementary schools. Students are primarily being educated by one teacher throughout the whole day. And those scores, elementary school scores, those are all in the 900s, I believe. Rarely will you ever, I don't think in this county we don't have any high schools that are in that range, or middle schools. I think our highest middle school, well, Richardson's it's a prep high. I'm assuming
yeah.
it's a
it's
charter.
a middle school.
Okay, well.
I think it's a magnet.
Okay, so that's kind of a unique setting. It might even be a charter. Who knows? But because charters follow a little different rules than some of the regular schools do. But let's just take from 2 on down to 10. The other 9 are all elementary schools. When students are able to stay with one teacher throughout the whole day, and the way that the instructional period is designed there, it's very different than at a middle school where they start having probably 4 periods that they're going through different teachers, and high school where they have 6 periods with different teachers. So you won't see 900s typically at a high school. Middle schools, if they can get in the 850 range, that's great. High schools, if they can hit in the 800 range, that's a very good progress that's being made, at least in this county. And so one of the things you have to look at is grade level comparisons. But what we have seen historically is that schools will make progress and then slip back a little bit. And then they'll make progress and slip back a little bit. And I liken that to climbing a steep mountain. When school scores are lower to start with, it's kind of like starting a climate base camp. The first few hundred feet or first few thousand feet in elevation, you can make progress. And it's easier to get those gains when the scores are starting out lower. But once you get into that 900 range for an elementary school, or 850 for a middle school, or 800 for a high school, it's hard to sustain that high level of push, especially with the diverse population. One of the biggest factors in the academic achievement levels in our county is the large number of students who do not speak English, who are not fluent. And so as Roger was pointing out earlier, it's kind of like us going to take a test somewhere in Greek when we only speak English. And as we start to learn Greek, we can do better in the test. But until students become proficient in the English language, their ability to score well on the tests, which are all administered in English, is a bit hampered. And so we see some demographic changes that go on with students. Also, I think during the recession, we've seen some impact on families. We've seen impact on families at home, which then translates into students, and we've seen impact on the classroom. When teachers are getting pink-slipped year after year, being notified that they're probably going to get laid off, and then those notices get rescinded, that happens year after year, that's going to have an impact on employee morale. It's going to have an impact on education. That's my input a little bit on some of those factors.
Roger, let's talk briefly about what are the key factors in getting those scores to 850 and higher. English as a second language, for example.
That's a really big one. Also, you have when we get the information back from the state, we're always looking at what they call numerically significant subgroups. We're looking at groups of so you're looking at different ethnic groups. You're looking at socioeconomically disadvantaged students with disabilities as well as English learners. And so you're looking at, okay, one of the areas you look at is the achievement gap. You want to see what type of reduction in the achievement gap might be there or not. And so I know State Superintendent of Public Instruction Jack O'Connell's been talking about the achievement gap, as of course we all have, for quite a while. And so that's one way we look to see if there's resources or there's new ways of looking at how we can help kids and help them that aren't doing so well to do even much better. Also, Dr. Young was, of course, completely right on. Some of the scores are going to change because there's boundary changes, there's all kinds of things that happen. Class sizes are increasing dramatically, and
especially at high school. And
everything he said is completely right on, of course.
so the list of scores that we showed, I happen to live down in Temecula, very close to 3 of those schools, and you know when there's a back-to-school night at any of those schools because of the amount of traffic at that hours and the cars parked everywhere. So I'm assuming that parental involvement is a key factor at not just the elementary school level, but also middle school and high school level as well.
Yes, in fact, we have a wonderful group of African American parents at one of our high schools, and they're very active to encourage their children to do academically well. And their scores have just skyrocketed over the last few years, and the achievement gap has been reduced dramatically. So parent involvement is just really important.
Just to dovetail on that, Nels, what we have seen is that in elementary school, again where they have the real high scores, back to school night, parent-teacher conferences, kindergartner, almost 100% participation. Making sure that their students are there, getting their work done, following up, helping with reading, alphabet, so forth. By the time they leave elementary school, that parent involvement piece has dropped off a bit. By the time they leave middle school, it's dropped off even further, especially when students go through that adolescent change that takes place. Sometimes the students kind of push the parents out of their lives. Parents aren't quite sure how to navigate those waters. For some folks, and then they go on to high school, and by the time they're in their senior year in high school, statistics show that it's a little bit less than 50% parent involvement overall that's taking place. So definitely parent involvement does make a difference. Mm-hmm. And if you go to the awards assemblies and things like that, the students that are being academically recognized, almost all of them, you will see the parents, mother, father, or caregiver, whoever is there, and siblings often are there in support. It's an example. It's a family culture thing.
Sure, and we're going to let Dana ask another question in a second. But ironically, the tools are better than ever to keep in contact. We can be notified about our high school students almost automatically with any grade score above or below a certain standard. I mean, there are tremendous tools.
We just have to connect those to parents' cell phones.
Well, or just I think the awareness, as well.
My husband
Dana.
is getting those things on his BlackBerry.
There you go.
There you go.
If my son misses an assignment, it goes through to his email, to his BlackBerry.
Fantastic.
So, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that O'Connell was talking about was he was asked some questions about the state funding, and you mentioned that as well, Mr. Young. There's budget cuts, class sizes are larger, but students statewide have shown improvement for the 8th year in a row, and O'Connell was very emphatic that if they had more funding, the kids could be doing even better. If they had more counselors, if they had school nurses, if the class sizes were getting smaller instead of larger, this growth that we're seeing would be even greater. And I'm not sure.
You want some feedback on that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, certainly everybody that's been reading the newspaper or watching shows like this online and the TV know that California is in the longest recession it's had and deepest since the Great Depression. And funding for public education in this nation has been cut by in the state has been cut by about $17 billion. In Riverside County, that translates to almost $1 billion over the last 3 years, which is a significant amount of funding. I think the reason that the students are doing as well as they are is because our instructional staff at the schools and all the support around that believes that we have a moral imperative to provide the highest quality education possible no matter what. And so we have people going above and beyond to try to make sure that every student in every school gets the best education possible, and for them to have the best chance of succeeding in life. So that's the approach and the mindset, I believe, that most everybody in public education has right now. Could we do better if we had more resources? Well, if you take a look at what is being eliminated in many schools to try to balance the budget, we talked about students with disabilities. That takes additional support, it takes additional services. Those services are mandated by law. That are the requirements for them. If we look at students that are trying to learn English, that takes additional support. If we take a look at students that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, generally speaking, there's generally, not always, there can be an absence of that parent involvement piece we talked about simply because of economics, an inability to be able to do those things. So schools that have students in those situations benefit from having tutors, math tutors, language tutors, English tutors, subject tutors, things that can really help the students. Professional development that is needed for the teaching staff and for the administration staff. Those kinds of things could be expanded if there was more funding. Maybe in other pieces, we see school years now being shortened. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. Students are attending school less days while their counterparts in other parts of the world are attending school in more days. And so certainly if we can keep kids in school longer, we're going to have a better educational program. I think that might end up in the long run having a significant impact on things.
Okay, we're going to wrap things up now. First, we're going to turn to Roger Yoho, the Director of Assessment and Accountability for the Corona-Norco Schools. So what's the takeaway here? Why don't you give us 45 seconds on the takeaway from a day like today where we have this this onslaught of data?
Well, I think there's a lot of encouragement, and even in these extraordinarily difficult times, teachers are just working their hearts out, schools are doing everything they can. In our district, we just say students first, students first. And so the youngsters are still doing even better than they did the year before overall. And we just thank our parents and all those involved, especially, of course, our teachers, for helping our kids do just even better. In our district, we kind of felt like hitting a grand slam the last 2 or 3 years, because our scores keep going up and up and up, and we're pretty excited about it.
Sure, and it'd be really great then to share like the parental group you mentioned and share that best practice with others as well.
Yes, sir.
Kenneth Young, Riverside County Superintendent of Schools, summarize for us?
I think the data shows that students, the educational programs in the county are doing very well overall, continuing to make a lot of progress. I think you will see across our county an additional emphasis being placed upon making sure that every student has the best chance possible to graduate from high school, to make sure that students are prepared to go into college, and to make sure that they're ready for the workforce. In today's society, those things are a must. And that's what we have to make sure that the students that complete our education system step out across that finish line with that background behind them.
Okay, you've been watching the Test Score Roundtable here on PE.com. We will have in the Tuesday edition of the Press Enterprise, we'll have a comprehensive set of data. Actually, we have it on PE.com now on the API and AYP. We'll also have coverage of these scores in the paper as well. This presentation will be available on demand on PE.com. I'd like to thank Dana Straley, PE education reporter. I'd like to thank Roger Yoho, the Director of Assessment and Accountability from the Corona-Norco Unified School District, and Kenneth Young, the Riverside County Superintendent of Schools. I'm Nels Jensen with PE.com. Thank you for joining us.